Today we're going to talk about squats and why you need to be doing them, but not the reason that you think. A lot of people put squats in their programs because they know it's a great exercise, but when I ask them the question, what are you trying to achieve? They don't know the answer. Are you squatting to build muscle? Are you squatting to build strength? Because those are two different types of squats. When the focus is building muscle, you need to consider what muscles are we actually building. Most people do a squat because they want to build quadriceps, but it's not as simple as just walking in and doing a squat and building quadriceps, because not all squats build quadriceps. If your goal is to build the big muscles on the front of your thighs, you need to position your body in a way to be able to do that. And there's two things you need to think of: the barbell position, your body position. And I'm going to show you both of those right now for my favorite quadricep developing squat pattern, the stiletto squat. Let's start with the grip that I use. To be honest with you, I'm not the best person to look for when it comes to grip. The cue that I give is to hold the barbell as close as your shoulder mobility allows. And a lot of people look at this and say, why are you holding it wide? That's because I can't bring my hands closer. I don't have very good shoulder mobility, but that is actually me following the same cue. That is as close as my shoulder mobility allows. So the reason why we do that is to increase the tension of our upper backs. If you're intentionally holding it with a wider grip, your shoulder blades are protracting, which relaxes the mid-back muscles, which is the rhomboids and the trapezius. If we bring our hands closer and closer, we are doing the opposite, which is retracting the shoulder blades or squeezing the shoulder blades together, which engages those mid-back muscles. Why do I want that? Because that's the muscles and the structures that support my thoracic spine, which is my upper back. When I'm pulling my elbows back and squeezing those together and holding with a tight, close grip, I'm squeezing those shoulder blades together. It makes it impossible for me to break form in my upper back. So for me to round in my upper back, my shoulder blades need to come forward, which is why holding the barbell close and bringing the shoulder blades together protects your upper back from rounding. But it's not just about upper back, it's about lower back as well, which is why the cue isn't just to hold the bar close and bring your shoulder blades together. I also want you to think about pulling your elbows down or your entire shoulder girdle down. Hands close and shoulder blades together is mid-back muscles, and then elbows down and shoulder girdle down is how we recruit the lats. The lats attach at the front of the humerus, the front of this bone here. They come underneath and they come all the way to the top of the pelvis. And it crosses the longest distance of our spine of all of the core muscles. So whenever you want to load your spine maximally, you want the biggest, strongest muscles available to do that. And amongst many other core muscles, the lats, I would say, are the biggest contributor for maintaining a strong and rigid spine. The next thing you've got to consider for a high bar squat pattern or a quad dominant squat pattern is bar placement. So with my hands close, I'm going to favor a high bar squat. The low bar squat is going to force me to tip over more and push my hips back, which makes me use more hips. I don't want that. I want to balance that bar on my upper traps to maintain an upright torso. Check this out. So this is upper trapezius. So that's low. That's a low bar squat. That's my rear delts. This is high bar squat. That's my upper trapezius, and that's where I'm going to be resting the barbell when my focus is to be as upright as possible so that I can do a quad focus squat pattern. Something that you might be wondering is how comfortable or uncomfortable this is to place the barbell on your neck like that. Well, I'm not really placing it on my neck. I'm placing it on the soft tissue, which is my muscles. Do not place it on your vertebra. Don't place it on bony structures. So check this out. I'm placing it on upper trapezius. I don't place it on my neck muscles, on my neck bones here. That's the cervical spine. If you do that, it is going to hurt. But if you place it on the upper trapezius, those muscles are creating a shelf for that barbell to sit on. Now, if you're a beginner and you've never done heavy barbell squats, I'll tell you now, you might feel discomfort. That's a conditioning process, and it happens to all of us. It happened to me when I first started training. I was wrapping a towel around the barbell. I was using those foam pads, and those are actually not a very good thing to do for your squat pattern. It changes the center of mass. It makes you hold the bar in a higher position, which is just not right for the squat pattern. So it is uncomfortable initially, but your skin really conditions and gets used to that position, and in time you don't feel it at all. So for me, whenever I'm placing the barbell on my back, I don't have any discomfort on my skin or on my neck. You're placing the barbell on muscle, not bony landmarks. And any discomfort on the skin, it happens to everyone that I know, especially when you first start. So if that's happening to you, that's all good. You will be conditioned in time. Now let's have a look at the stiletto squat in real time. I'm gonna go for 3 reps on this weight. so you saw the barbell position, you saw how I maintain an upright torso angle. The next thing you need to really be focusing on is taking the muscles through the greatest stretch. So from a fully stretched position to a fully contracted position. So how do I do that? I go as deep as possible, but not just deep in the squat, deep in the exact muscle group and joint that I'm trying to work on, which is knee joint. I want to maximize my knee bend to as deep as I can go. How deep? Until your hamstring is pressing against your calf. That's how I know I've maximally flexed my knee joint, so that's flexion, so that I can extend my knee joint. So if it's just a partial rep like this, that's not maximal stretch on the quadriceps. So this is why I love the heel elevation. It allows me to achieve that full knee bend while still maintaining a neutral spine position. Okay, so check this out. If I don't stand on that heel elevation to get that full knee bend, I need to really round my lower back, which takes a lot of the tension off my quadriceps and puts it on my back. If your goal is to build your back muscles, fine, that could be okay. But typically, most people do this to build quadriceps. And if your goal is to build quadriceps, maximize knee bend and minimize any movement at your spine and your hips. And that's the bottom position of your quad dominant squats. So this red plate that I'm using, that's my preference. It's the thickest plate of the bumper plates that I have. My mobility isn't amazing, it's okay. And some people respond very well. Some people, this is a little bit too thick. Some people prefer a smaller, slightly smaller heel elevation. And if that's you, as long as you can achieve that position where your torso is as upright as possible and your hamstring is pressing against your calf. Now, that brings me on to the next point with the heel elevation. Some people use these types of heel ramps. These are great, don't get me wrong. However, in my experience, having a look at the angle that this is placed on, this forces you to keep your feet straight, which can work. But in my experience, whenever I'm going as deep as I can, I want my knees to go slightly outwards. So therefore, I need to slightly point my toes outwards. Now, if you point your toes outwards on a ramp like this, have a look at my ankles. It's going to force my ankles to cave in. Okay, because the ramp is pointing downwards and I'm pointing my toes outwards. It doesn't match, which is why I prefer a plate here so that I can contour my feet in that same direction as that round edge of the plate. So that's why I prefer the heel elevation of a plate rather than a ramp that's pointing your feet straight ahead. If you have ramps, if you have two different ramps and you can point them outwards in the same direction as your toes, fantastic, use that. But if you're using one of these, notice that it's going to force your ankles to cave in. You don't want that. Have a look at my shoes. This is just a flat-soled shoe. I love these shoes. They're actually boxing shoes, but they're very comfortable for me. But my recommendation is to not use a running sneaker. They're too thick and cushiony, and the more cushiony that the shoe is, the less stability that you have. The next alternative to that is a heel-elevated squat shoe that they use in Olympic weightlifting. Let me show you mine. Come over here. These are my squat shoes, and this is the standard weightlifting shoe. These are Adidas brand, not sponsored by them. Nike's good, and there's lots of other great brands as well. But if you have a look at the heel elevation here, that's about 1 inch or slightly less than 1 inch. So for me, look at the difference between heel elevation with this shoe and that is, this is about 2 inches and this is just less than 1 inch. So I need slightly more heel elevation than that to be able to achieve that perfect upright position. The next thing is I wouldn't use these as well as that. And the reason why is this sole is rock solid. That doesn't bend and therefore it doesn't grip onto that plate very well. So the slight cushion on the sole of this shoe allows my feet to grip on to the edge of that plate and sit comfortably. Some people think that their balance might be an issue, and that would be an issue if you're using this rock hard surface. This kind of rocks from side to side, it doesn't quite grip to the edge. So don't use the weightlifting shoes if you're going to do the stiletto squat with a plate. Use whatever your sneaker that you have so that it grips onto the edge and that's nice and stable. Another concern people have is it's a lot of knee bend. Is that going to hurt my knees? Well, if we have a look at the weight here, that's 170 kilograms. My best squat is well over 300 kilograms. So this isn't, I'm not maxing out on this type of squat pattern. So although it does place load on the knee joint, the knee joints are strong and they're designed to bear load. So the best way to strengthen anything is to gradually load it over time. I didn't just come in and one day squat 170 kilograms in this technique. I've gradually built the conditioning of my knees to be able to accept that weight. So if that's you and you've got a concern with that, don't start with a heavy weight. Start with a light weight. Start with even a goblet squat. So a goblet squat, I'll just use a light plate here. And this is, you can use a dumbbell or a plate or whatever. this is how you can just gradually feel that range of motion under load and start practicing and conditioning your knees with a light weight. And then, like everything, you apply the principle of progressive overload, gradually get heavier and heavier, your knee joints get stronger and stronger, and then you're able to squat heavy weights with your knees with no problem. When it comes to squatting for muscle building, we want to consider a few things. The optimal rep ranges for hypertrophy is a lot more flexible than it is for strength. What does that mean? It means that the research shows us that we can build equal amounts of muscle mass up to 30 rep range. So that's pretty broad. However, don't just take that research and consider we should be doing 30 reps of squats. That's not optimal. We need to consider the complexity of the movement as well. So when it comes to building muscle, we need to choose a rep range that's appropriate for that specific exercise. And in my opinion, for the squats, the optimal rep range for building muscle is anywhere between 4 reps up to 8 reps. Of course, you can do slightly more than that, but that's what you need to consider. The muscle that you're targeting needs to be the limiting factor of the movement. And usually when I'm doing an exercise like a squat or a stiletto squat, when I'm doing more than 8 reps on that complex movement, that's when other muscles start to fatigue, such as my lower back or even my cardiovascular system. And that's not the intention when the goal is building muscle. When the goal is building muscle, you need to think of the exact muscle that you're trying to build, and that is the muscle that needs to fatigue first. So therefore, optimal rep range for muscle building for an exercise like a stiletto squat or any of your quad dominant free weight squat patterns, in my opinion, 4 to 8 rep range is the sweet spot. So let's have a look at the techniques that I just used, starting with the bar placement. Same rule applies with grip position. Holding the bar as close as your shoulder mobility allows. Remember, I don't have very good shoulder mobility, so that's why I'm holding it from collar to collar, but that's as close as my shoulder mobility allows. When I come underneath the bar, I'm placing it on the shelf created by my rear deltoids, that's the shoulder muscles. Once again, I'm not placing on any bony landmarks, so if you feel that it's resting on a bone, it's in the wrong position. It needs to sit on that shelf. See how snug and comfortable it is right there? Now from here, the next thing that I'm doing is pulling my elbows back and shoulder blades down. That's the cue that I apply with all of my back squats, and that's how I engage all of the right muscles of my upper back. The elbows back and the hands close pulls my shoulder blades together and increases activation of my mid-back muscles. That stops me from breaking form in my upper back. The elbows down recruits my lats, and that stops me from breaking in my lower back or the entire back really. The lats crosses the longest distance of your spine of all of your core muscles. And whenever you're loading your spine, elbows down. Another way of thinking of that is increase the distance between your shoulders and your ears. So if you're shrugging when you're doing a squat, not very good for lats. Drop those shoulders and also reach your head towards the ceiling. So it's kind of double end. So pull the shoulders down and pull the head up. That's lats. Hands close, sitting on the delts, elbows back and down. Now from here, 3-step walkout. So what I want to do is have my feet directly underneath my hips here. So some people have their feet really wide because that's a strong base of support. The problem with having your feet wide is when you walk, you have to take one foot off the ground. When you take a foot off the ground, that's your base of support. So your whole body needs to shift. So these racks are close for me, but most people squat out of a power rack in the gym and these racks come out to here. So what happens is if you shift to the side, these plates are gonna smack into the racks, and that's very distracting when you wanna lift a heavy weight. So what you wanna do is no rocking from side to side. You start the position with your feet close. So when you take one foot off the ground, you're not gonna sway to the side. Stand, feet underneath your hips. The first step you do is straight back. The reason why we go straight back is to clear the rack. You don't go from here to the side because you notice when I go to the side, that's where these plates are going to hit onto the rack. So you don't want to do that. First step is straight back. Now we've cleared the rack. Now the next 2 steps is where we position our feet. So that is 3 steps. Now, the best way to practice that is from your very first warm-up set. So from the empty bar, and practice that every single time you come under the bar. What a lot of people do is with an empty weight, they unrack it, they don't really think about it because it's really light and they think it doesn't really matter. So for those sets, it doesn't matter. So when you come to the top set, you don't get a huge amount of practice of those really, really heavy weights. That's why you want to practice perfectly when you're doing all of your warm-up weights. That's what you need to be doing with your walkout. It's the 3-step walkout. Feet under your hips, first step back, and then the next 2 steps is to get your body in position. This takes time to master, especially when you're going super heavy. So if you can't do it in 3 steps and you end up here on the 3rd step, you don't just have to squat just because it's 3 steps. Of course you can adjust your feet, but that's what you're working towards as you become a more and more advanced lifter. So if you need 4 steps or 5 steps, fine, work towards 3. That's the optimal way to save your energy and put yourself in the best position for a heavy squat. Now let's have a look at the rack height. So if you have a look at the position that I'm in here, some of you might think that's a really low rack height. Now here's a few things that you need to consider. When that weight gets heavier and heavier, it squashes your body down further and further. So if you're measuring your rack height from an empty barbell, you might be correct when there's no weight on the bar, there's no compression of your body. But as that gets heavier and heavier, what happens is that squashes your body down and you'll be pushing up and you won't be able to stand that weight up because it's too heavy and it's compressing your body. So my recommendation is always, whatever rack height you think you're at, choose one that's slightly lower than that so that when you get to your top weights, you would rather squat that weight up than have to tippy toe that weight down. Tippy toeing heavy weights down can lead to catastrophic injuries, which has happened in the past. So you're always going to be safer and stronger having it a little bit too low than a little bit too high. Now let's talk footwear. So this is my favorite shoes for squatting. It's not really better than any other type of flat-soled shoe. I'm choosing a flat-soled shoe for my low bar squat with minimal padding, minimal cushioning on the sole. I don't want a big running shoe with thick, comfortable sole of the shoe. That's going to be too cushiony and it's going to be unstable. So you want relatively little amount of cushioning. Some people do it with bare feet. That's also okay, but a lot of gyms don't allow bare feet because of insurance purposes. In my gym, you're allowed bare feet, but a lot of gyms, commercial gyms, they won't allow it. So you want a nice flat-soled shoe, and this is my preference. This is actually a boxing shoe. I think they look pretty cool as well. They make my calves look big. Added bonus, but they're not really that much better than any other flat-soled shoe that you might have. So whether they're Vans or Chuck Taylors or anything like that, they're also a great choice of flat-soled shoe. What's the alternative to that? The weightlifting shoe. So people ask me often, can you use a weightlifting shoe? Isn't this a squatting shoe? So technically, it's not a squat shoe, it's a weightlifting shoe. Weightlifting is the sport you see in the Olympics. That's the clean and jerk and the snatch. People refer to that as Olympic lifting, but technically the sport's called weightlifting, and that's a weightlifting shoe. And the reason why they have a heel elevation like that, of course, it's a hard, stable surface, but the heel elevation is a lot better when you want to catch a weight in a bottom position, so in a full squat, and have your arms overhead. So to have your arms overhead, you want an upright torso angle. The flat-soled shoe that I'm using allows me to push my hips back and look at my torso angle. I'm leaning forward. I don't want my torso to be leaning forward when I do a snatch and have my arms over my head. That's not a strong position, which is why having the heels elevated, so I'm exaggerating this, having the heels elevated allows a more upright position, which is a lot stronger for catching a heavy barbell overhead. For my low bar squat, I don't need to catch a barbell overhead, so I can lean forward, and in fact, it's a slight advantage to slightly lean my torso forward when I'm doing this low bar squat, because that's going to put me in a position to use my strong hip extensors. So quad dominant squat, not much hip extension. Hip dominant squat, a lot of hip extension, and have a look at my knee bend. So this is when I do my quad dominant squat pattern, hamstring press against the calf. Hip dominant squat pattern, there's a large gap between my hamstring and calf, so there's not a lot of knee bend, and therefore not a lot of need for my quadriceps to work as hard. But there is a lot more hip bend on this low bar squat pattern compared to my high bar squat pattern that I use to build quadriceps. So it comes back to that question. What if you want to use these shoes? Can you still use the elevated heel shoe for a low bar squat? The answer is, of course you can, and some of the best squatters in the world in powerlifting competition do use that. But typically, the ones that I see using that are the ones that lack mobility to achieve powerlifting depth with a flat-soled shoe. So what is powerlifting depth? That's where the crease of the hip must go below the top of the knee. Okay, so hopefully that's demonstrating that right now. Okay, so that's probably parallel, and parallel technically is shallow. So it needs to be below parallel. Okay, and anything above that is considered a shallow squat and technically not allowed in powerlifting competition. So that's my recommendation, is if your goal is to shift the heaviest loads, you want to use the heaviest structures, which is your hips. And if you have the mobility to achieve powerlifting depth with a flat-soled shoe, that's my preference. If you lack the mobility to achieve that depth, use the weightlifting shoe. The optimal rep range for squats when your goal is strength is the 1 to 6 rep range. When it comes to strength, all of the science shows us that you need to be lifting heavy. How heavy? Anything above 80%. And if you're going above 80% of your max, typically it's going to be 8 reps and less. So when it comes to strength training for your squat pattern, for strength, less than 6 reps. The next thing you need to consider for your leg days is accessory exercises. And I'm going to show you the different variations just using one piece of machinery, and that's the leg press. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's a very nice complement to your free weight squat pattern as the first exercise, which is the most complex, the most demanding. And then accessory exercise, we can do things like machines. But I'm going to show you 2 different variations on the exact same piece of equipment, just like I showed you 2 different variations on the barbell squat, where you change your foot position and therefore you change the emphasis on where you're building muscle. So the first way to do a leg press is probably the most commonly performed technique, is standard foot position, which is just outside of hip width. And this is very similar to how I would perform a low bar squat. It's just outside of hip width, pushing through the whole foot, and it's a very hip dominant pattern. And the way you can tell it's a hip dominant pattern is my hips bend a lot, so my thigh comes all the way up to my chest, and my knees don't bend a lot. So this is equivalent to what I did with a low bar squat. Things that you need to think about, see these handles here? I'm pulling myself down so that my lower back doesn't bend off the pad. You want to keep the spine nice and neutral. And the way that I do that is I hold these handles and I pull myself down. Great way to perform a leg press. But this is what you need to consider. If I just did a low bar squat, which is a hip dominant squat pattern, why would I want to do a leg press that does the exact same movements? It positions the body in the same way and it targets the quadriceps in the exact same way, or should I say the hips in the exact same way. That's known as exercise redundancy. And what you want to do is avoid that by targeting the muscles that you neglected in the main movement. So if I did a low bar squat as my first exercise, I wouldn't want to do the same muscles in the same movement pattern as the secondary exercise. I want to choose a different style, and that's where I'm going to choose this style of leg press, which is a quadriceps dominant leg press. Now the difference here is I bring my feet closer and lower. What I do here, which a lot of people think is strange, is I push through the balls of my feet. I allow my heels to lift, which positions me in the exact same position as the stiletto squat, and it's the same principle. I'm looking to achieve full knee bend. How do I know it's full knee bend? My hamstring presses against my calf in the bottom position. And this makes this leg press quadriceps dominance. If I'm gonna do a low bar squat as the first exercise, what I wanna do is complement it with my secondary exercise with a movement pattern targeting muscles that I've neglected in the main movement. So it's a hip dominant squat for low bar, and now I'm complementing it with a quad dominant leg press. On the flip side, if you start with a quad dominant squat, such as the stiletto squat as the first exercise to build quadriceps, I don't want to keep on doing more quads. I should have done enough of that in the first exercise. I want to complement it by doing the secondary exercise as a hip dominant movement to complement my quad work. So this is the hip dominant leg press that I would use as a secondary exercise to complement my quad dominant squat pattern. For the leg press, whether your goal is strength or muscle building, my opinion is higher reps are more suitable. When you're doing a leg press and you're upside down in that position, doing the strength rep ranges, which is the 1 to 6 rep range, can be pretty demanding, and I personally feel like my head is about to explode. So whenever I'm doing a leg press, I still consider that my goal might be strength, but I need to pair the appropriate reps with the appropriate exercise. And in my opinion, the leg press needs a high rep range to feel like your head's not going to explode and you get adequate stimulation. So I like to do my leg press from minimum 8 rep range all the way up to 30. The next accessory exercise is what I consider to be a must-have in your squat program. The reason why it's a must-have is, although the squats are a fantastic exercise, so is the leg press and all of the variations, there is one muscle in the quadriceps that you've neglected, and that is the rectus femoris. The reason why you've neglected it is that rectus femoris crosses 2 joints, the knee joint and the hip joint. The other 3 only cross the knee joint. So whenever you're bending your knee and straightening it, you're working all 3 heads. But the rectus femoris, when you bend your knee, you're also bending your hip, which relaxes that muscle. It's conflicting action. So what we need to do to be able to target that rectus femoris is isolate it. The way that we isolate the rectus femoris is a leg extension. Now, just to clarify it, it's not just a rectus femoris exercise. It hits all heads of the quadriceps, but it doesn't neglect the rectus femoris. And that is the leg extension. Now, yeah, pretty easy to perform. Now, here's a bonus tip for you. So this is a standard leg extension. I'm keeping my hip fixed and I'm extending my knee joint. Now, the bonus tip is if you have access to a machine that you can lean back a little bit further, that's going to place you in a position where you extend your hip joint and create more of a stretch at that rectus femoris. So it might look a little bit funny and feel a little bit funny, but this increases the length or the stretch on the rectus femoris and has been shown to be superior for building muscle on that rectus femoris. So if your goal is muscle building or hypertrophy, what muscles do you want to build? The correct answer is all of them. I want to build all of my quadriceps. And if all you do is those squat pattern or compound squat pattern exercises, you are neglecting rectus femoris. So whether your goal is strength or muscle building, you don't want to neglect any muscles. So that means the mandatory accessory exercise for all of your squats is a leg extension. Last but not least is the cherry on top. Today we're talking about quadriceps, but when people talk about squats and legs, you're assuming the entire leg, which includes hamstrings as well. And unfortunately, the squat is not a very good exercise for hamstrings. The reason for that is the hamstrings cross 2 joints, the hip and the knee, just like the rectus femoris. And when you bend the hip in a squat, you're lengthening the hamstring, which is a good thing, but then you bend the knee and that relaxes it. So they're conflicting actions. So therefore, if all you do for hamstrings development is your squat pattern exercises, you're gonna end up with underdeveloped hamstrings. So although this session is about quadriceps, the reason why I've chosen this as a bonus exercise is whenever I program for legs, I'll always add in some hamstring curls. It's a non-fatiguing exercise, and you can perform this on every single leg day to add that extra bit of volume to make sure that every single muscle of your hamstrings are being developed. Bonus tip here, this is a lying hamstring machine. I actually don't have access to a seated hamstring curl, but if you had the choice, the seated hamstring curl is a knee flexion exercise, but it starts you off leaning slightly forward, which increases the stretch at the hamstrings, which is slightly superior for building muscles on those hamstrings. But if you don't have access to that, like me, it's not a deal breaker, and this is still a great exercise. Make sure you're including your hamstring curls in all of your leg sessions. Hamstring curls and leg extensions follow the same rules. It's an accessory exercise, it's not complex, and using low rep range typically doesn't feel amazing. And that's where sometimes if you go so heavy with low reps on a leg extension or a leg curl, it feels like something's about to snap. So my preferred rep range for the leg curls and the leg extensions is typically anywhere between 8 reps up to 15 reps. And now you know the difference between squatting for muscle building and squatting for strength gain, and how to put it all together to achieve your goals. This is information that took me more than 20 years to learn, and I'm giving it to you because I want you to succeed. So if you haven't already, make sure you click subscribe on this channel because I'm going to be bringing you much more of this information. So what do you think of that? Do you think I did well? How did the squat look? Do you think I did good technique? Do you think I looked nervous when I was talking to the camera, or do you think that's a little bit better? You think it's going good? Yeah. I'm really trying to get more friends. So hopefully people will like me. Yeah, okay.